Unit 2.2, The Three Questions. Let's read this passage and see if the hermit answered the king's question or no. Let's read together. The king turned around and saw a bearded man come running out of the forest. The man held his hands pressed against his stomach, and blood was flowing from under them. When he reached the king, he fainted and fell to the ground, moaning feebly. The king and the hermit unfastened the man's clothing. There was a large wound in his stomach. The king washed it as well as he could, and bandaged it with his handkerchief and a towel the hermit had. But the blood would not stop flowing, and the king again and again removed the bandage, soaked with warm blood, and washed and rebandaged the wound. When at last the blood stopped flowing, the man revived and asked for something to drink. The king brought some fresh water and gave it to him. Okay, children, I'll begin with the explanation. So the king turned around and saw a bearded man running out of the forest. He was wounded and blood was coming out of his stomach. As he reached near the king, he lost his consciousness and fell on the ground, as he was in great pain. Then the king and the hermit removed the man's clothing and saw that there was a large wound in his stomach. The king washed his wound himself and bandaged it with his own handkerchief. The blood did not stop flowing, and the king again and again washed and rebandaged his wound. At last, when the blood stopped flowing, the man gained consciousness and asked for some water, and the king happily gave it to him. Okay, children, now let's read the further passage. Meanwhile, the sun had set and it had become cool. So the king, with the hermit's help, carried the wounded man into the hut. The man lay there quietly with his eyes closed. By now, the king was so tired after his walk and the work he had done that he lay down himself and also fell asleep. When he woke in the morning, it took his some time to remember whether he was and who this strange bearded man lying by his side and gazing intently at him. "Forgive me," said the bearded man in a weak voice, when he saw that the king was awake and was looking at him. "I do not know you, and I've nothing to forgive for you," said the king. Okay, and now I'll begin with the explanation. By this time, it was evening, and the king and the hermit took him inside the hut as it was cold outside. The man was lying on the bed quietly, and as the king was also tired, he slept on the floor itself. When the king woke up in the morning, at first he did not remember where he was and who the bearded man was lying beside him and was staring at him. Then, when the wounded man saw that the king was awake, he started asking him for forgiveness. But the king was confused and told that he didn't know him and that there was nothing to forgive. Okay, now let's read further. "You do not know me, but I know you. I am that enemy of yours who swore to revenge himself on you because you executed his brother and seized his property. I knew you had gone alone to see the hermit, and I resolved to kill you on your way back. But the day passed, and you did not return. So I came out of my ambush to find you. Your bodyguards recognized me and wounded me. I escaped from them, but would have bled to death had you not dressed my wound. I wished to kill you, but you have saved my life. Now, if I live, and if you wish it, I'll serve you all my life. Okay, children, now I'll explain this. Now, the wounded man revealed that he was the king's enemy because the king had killed his brother and seized his property. So he took the opportunity to take this revenge. He had planned to kill the king as he knew that the king came all alone to meet the hermit. The wounded man had planned to kill him on the way when he would be returning home, that is the king. But as the king did not turn up, the wounded man came out of his hiding place and started searching for the king. So while he was searching for the king, his guards saw him and attacked him very badly. So they had recognized him. But he ran away from there and reached near the hermit's hut. And if the king would have not dressed his wound, then he would have died, and he was very thankful to the king for saving his life. In return of this, the man told the king that if he would survive, then he would serve the king all his life. Okay, children, now let's read the further passage. The king was very glad to have made peace with an enemy so easily and to have gained him for a friend. He not only forgave him, but said he would send his men and his own physician to attend to him. The king then took leave of him and went out of the hut to look for the hermit. Before going away, he wished once more to beg for an answer to the question he had asked. The hermit was outside, on his knees, sowing seeds in the beds that he had been dug the day before. The king approached him and said, "For the last time, I pray you to answer my questions, wise man." "You have already been answered," said the hermit, still crouching on his thin legs and looking up at the king who stood before him. "What do you mean?" asked the king. Okay, children, now I'll begin with the explanation. In spite of all this, the king was very happy to make peace with an enemy so easily. He did not only forgive the man, but also promised to send his own doctor to look after his wound properly. Then he left the hut and came out to look for the hermit, as he wanted the answers to his 3 questions that he had already asked. The hermit was sowing seeds in the ground which they had dug the day before. The king went to him and asked him for the last time for the answers. So the hermit finally answered him, telling that he had already got the answers to the questions. But the king was still confused, as he did not know what the hermit was talking about. Okay, children, let's read this. "Do you not see," replied the hermit, "if you had not pitied my weakness yesterday and stayed to dig these beds for me, you would have gone back and been killed by that man. So the most important time was when you were digging the beds, and I was the most important man. And to do me good was your most important business. Afterwards, the most important time was when you were attending to that man. For if you would not bound his wounds, he would have died without having made peace with you. So he was the most important man, and what you did for him was your most important business. Remember then, there is only one time that is important. Now. It is the most important time because it's the only time when we have any power. The most necessary person is the one with whom you are, for you do not know whether you will ever have dealings with anyone else. And the most important thing is to do this person good, because for that purpose alone were you sent into this life. Okay, children, now I'll explain this passage. So the hermit replied, saying that if the king would have not pitied the hermit while digging and would have not stayed back, then he would have been killed by that man. So the most important time was when the king was digging the ground, and the hermit was the most important person, and the good he did to the hermit was the most important thing to do at that time. Further, he said that later on, the most important time was taking care of the wounded man. Otherwise, he would have died without making peace with him, and the wounded man was the most important man at that time. And the good that he did for him was the most important occupation. So, children, the hermit further said that the most important time is the present time, when we have the power to do many things. The most important person is the one with whom you are with now in the present. And the most important thing is to do good to this person with whom you are now in the present. Okay, children, with this we have completed with the explanation. Thank you for listening. Take care.